Welcome everyone to our October webinar, Moving Beyond Welcoming to Community Belonging. My name is Rebecca Trout and I am the Program Director of the All-America City Award here at the National Civic League. For those of you less familiar, the League is a 125-year-old nonprofit and we aim to advance civic engagement to create more equitable and thriving communities. The All-America City Award is often referred to as our flagship program. It began in 1949 to recognize outstanding examples of civic engagement. So we use the awards to celebrate those communities, and then we use this webinar series to really lift up examples from communities across the country and to share resources and programs that might help communities with their engagement work. So before I dive into today's topic, just wanted to give a short plug for this year's All-America City Award. We are pleased to be able to co-convene the 2022 awards with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And as such, our theme for this year is going to be housing as a platform for promoting early school success and equitable learning recovery. So you can read a little bit about the areas of focus within this year's award on your screen here. All of this is also available on our website. You'll also see some important dates that are coming up. I want to specifically draw your attention to the November 18th webinar. So that'll be an informational webinar for anyone who might be thinking about applying this year. We'll answer questions in general about the award and then specifically about this year's theme. So I encourage you to join us for that. I'll be sending a follow-up email later today and we'll include information in case you want to join us on November 18th. But for today, I am pleased to be able to be talking about belonging and how to create a sense of belonging in our communities. Thrilled to be joined here by Scott Welch, founder and president of Global Bridge Builders. Scott was recently interviewed by our president, Doug Linkhart, for our National Civic Review. I'll be sending out that article and encourage you to read that. And then we're also joined today by Stacey Stout, who's the Director of Equity Engagement for the City of Grand Rapids. And she has some experience with both the Belonging Index that Scott's going to be talking about, as well as the Belonging Dinners. Before I hand it off to them, just a few housekeeping items. You'll notice that everyone is muted. We ask you to remain so, just to cut down on background noise. We will be having 10 minutes or so for a Q&A at the very end, and we'll give everybody the opportunity to either unmute and raise their hand to ask a question or to enter their questions into the chat. As I mentioned, we are recording this webinar and I will send the webinar recording as well as the slides in that follow-up email I referenced. So in case you miss anything, not to worry, you will have an opportunity to revisit. And now I'm happy to be able to hand it off to the capable hands of Scott. Scott, thank you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everyone as well. And you know, we're really delighted to be here. Let me just share my screen with you. And so we can get the slides up. You know, one of the things I would like to say, and maybe, you know, Stacey's like, oh, you didn't have to do that. But I wanted to say that, you know, it's so critical to have leaders in your community that say, you know, this is important. Because when I began to develop the index, you know, the first thing you want to do is do it in your own backyard. And I found a real friend and support in Stacey Stout, as well as our amazing leadership in Grand Rapids. Mark Washington is city manager, Rosalind Bliss is mayor, but the person that's going to really kind of walk this thing through, well, for me, it was Stacey Stout. And so we really look at this as something where the city deems it important enough. They can take this, you know, this crazy idea from one of their citizens, but who's a major fan of our city, and say, you know, we believe in this, Scott. We want to actually take this forward. And so again, just want to give kudos to Stacey in my city. So we're going to be talking about, you know, if you want to reach us, of course, here our social handles as well as our web addresses and things like that. By the way, there is you can actually take the survey just as for fun on the belonginginitiative.us. It's right now, it's only in English and Spanish, but we will add more later on. So let's just talk about what the Belonging Initiative is, and then I'll get into the kind of the other parts of it and then hand it over to Stacey. So as you can see here, the whole idea, the premise of this was I wanted to find out the difference, or if there was a difference between welcoming and belonging, because I honestly didn't know, but I just knew that there's a reason that some people stay and there's a reason that some people leave, not just in cities, but in companies, in neighborhoods, in schools. And so I looked at it as a holistic kind of approach. My background, I've been in the focus of global diversity, equity, and inclusion for 25 years. Published and all that kind of stuff, but I wanted to do something that could help other cities. And so again, wonderfully, with our city, Grand Rapids being the first one to do it, the goal is actually to have other cities to do it, because if we can create belonging communities and move beyond welcoming, that's a great retention strategy, recruitment strategy, community strategy. So as you can see, this is why we did this. We want to help people move from welcoming to actually belonging. Let's see, here we go. So the hypothesis is really quite simple, and that is that belonging matters to cities and organizations. And we look at that as an umbrella and measurement of health, right, of its health. And so one of the things that I always say is, it is important that you have development. You have large buildings, reaching towards the sky. And I mean, that's all great, but it really doesn't tell you how healthy an organization or a city is. It's one measure of organization's health. And so that's where you look at belonging is much more grassroots. It's much more where people live, where they play, where they work, where they reside. And so we look at that as a really very important measure in terms of an organization's health or a city's health as well. So there's two components. So I'm a foodie. I'll just confess right out of the gate. I really enjoy really great, delicious food. And so as part of, but really what I wanted to do is I knew that a meal, there's something really powerful about a meal, and just sitting down with someone and sharing kind of your life and your background and your story. And so we have something that we call the belonging practice. And really what that is, we're having one, by the way, at one of our organizations here in Grand Rapids on the 9th of November. And it really is around the whole idea of a shared meal. And the whole idea is to create community connections and then also share cultural experiences, because you can walk into that by yourself, but you walk out with connections and friends. Right. And one of the things we do, just so you know, is when we set up a dinner, generally the dinner it's a curated meal. Very nice meal but we also we bring in film cameras, because we're also documenting this in terms of kind of with professional filmmakers and things like that, because we want to make sure that we want it to be easy for them to do. So we have the meal, we ask the question, the name tag only has your first name, your last name, no, because the point is not what you do, but it's just who you are. So that's the meal. The second part of the index, which we'll talk more about, and Stacey's going to be speaking as to how Grand Rapids has done it and continues to. So that is the index that is more the quantitative analysis where we connect communities nationwide. So welcoming, belonging, it's real quick, real simple, and that is this. To me, what I've learned over time, again, I went into this not really knowing. I wanted to ask the question, and I wanted to collect that information and document it. Welcoming can happen through inanimate objects. So, welcome to Grand Rapids, welcome to, Best Buy, but you can only belong through other human beings, right? And that comes through an ideology. I've done a lot of work in South Africa, and it says essentially Ubuntu. We can only be human through other human beings, right? And so this is where we look across the continuum. And again, it's welcoming to belonging. Organizations, communities are on this continuum. So that's really the main difference. Why it matters. It speaks to the health, as we said. We speak a lot about social cohesion, where people feel connected and they feel a part of it. It's also more than merely possessing a welcoming stance, right, with its current and new residents. It's measurable in terms of with cities and organizations, and it can also be influenced positively or negatively over time. And then finally, it is something where it leads to, and this has been our focus and my focus, and that is greater talent attraction, recruitment, and retention, right? So you want people to stick, right, and not just visit, but you want them to feel like they have a real voice and a say. So just excerpts, it's welcoming is formal versus belonging, which is informal, tolerant versus valuing, short-term visit versus long-term engagement, hospitality versus residing or residence, nice versus authentic. Also it's them. No, we don't want that. It's a we. It's a we equation. And it's not just I only see you, but I also see me. So those are just some real quick anecdotal ways that we've learned over time, and I continue to learn. Now I'm going to turn it over to Stacey, and you can go from there, Stacey.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And thank you all
Sure.
for choosing to spend your afternoon with us today, or those that will watch the recording. So really excited to be here. So good. Good afternoon. Greetings. I join you virtually from Anishinaabe land, also known as Grand Rapids, Michigan. Like it was stated, my name is Stacey Stout, Director of Equity Engagement, and my pronouns are she and her. And I serve in this role to advance justice and healing in community. That's why I applied. That's my goal. I strive to bring my full self to this role. I'm Indigenous, Latina, Mexican American, cis woman, mom, wife, auntie, tia, outgoing introvert, and a lot of other identities. And I share those identities because I want to honor all of who I am and those in places where I've come from, right? And I share that because being your full self with all your identities is currently how I'm defining belonging. And so I wanted to share that with you today. I was also asked to be here to share a snapshot, an abbreviated history, if you will, of the city of Grand Rapids' journey to advance equity and to create, policy and practice that really fosters welcoming and belonging. So I also, with this slide, these are some notes really recently from the Othering and Belonging Conference by the Othering and Belonging Institute that happened last week. It was a fantastic conference, and it really helped further deepen my understanding of belonging. And learning is a journey. So if we were to connect a year from now, my definition might change a bit, and that's okay. But today, it's really this aspirational goal, and it's a vision where people can be their full selves, right? And fully participate to co-create whatever that is. A neighborhood, neighbors, a city, a school environment, whatever that is, they're co-creating together. It's a belief, a value system, if you will, that everyone and everything, including Earth itself, are connected, right? Like we are connected. All of us here in some way, we are connected and have a shared fate. It's also weaving our stories. We talk about, that's why Scott mentioned the dinners, to sit down and really find those bridging moments and how we are connected and how we are similar, even if we have disagreements and we don't agree on everything. Where do we actually connect? And I think that's really powerful and healing. And for me, a sense of belonging for myself and to create and be that bridge with others is also having that curious stance and wondering about other people's lived experience and perspectives, even if it's different than my own. So I just wanted to introduce that. Next slide. So our abbreviated, it's very abbreviated, and I always get nervous about this because there's so many wonderful people that came before me in this organization. So Ingrid Scott Weekly, and just Patty Cotto, who I work with, who's been in the city for about 30 years. And so this is very abbreviated, okay? So I wanted to make sure that you know that. And so when I did start in 2016, right away, the first week, submitted a letter of interest to join with GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, to join the Racial Equity Here cohort with other cities to really shift our organization from diversity inclusion to equity, which later got us to welcoming and belonging. But it built upon decades of work. It was shared leadership. We were with the mayor, the city manager, this cohort from the city, and it was really interesting because if you're doing equity work, it's about shifting power. And so we practiced it within our own team that says, you might be the mayor or city manager, but here we're equal, right? I don't care where you are in the org chart, we're going to make these collective decisions together. And it was really a beautiful way to try on this new framing. Part of this work also was knowing our story as an organization, whether you're with government, non-government, any institution, institutional racism is everywhere, right? And so we had to really look in the mirror and say, okay, let's look at our history and how have we advanced inequities in her community and really kind of own that. And it was very powerful. But go to the last bullet, but once we knew better, we knew we had to do better, right? And so it was really powerful. Again, that storytelling of our own story. And as we work on belonging, knowing each other's stories is very powerful. So as you leave here today, you might may not know the data points, but you'll remember the stories. So in this journey also with GARE and the National Equity Project, I'll share their links in a moment. We learned about structures. We had this shared language so we can talk about it, right? So if you can't address it, if you can't talk about it. And so that was really important to us. Next slide. And then, you know, the mayor started that same month too, Mayor Rosalind Bliss, and this is a picture of her a month later at her first State of the City, and she said, racial equity here. And she's like, look, folks, we got a problem. We got to do something different. And that was really powerful. And then she started a community read on this book, City Within a City, The Black Freedom Struggle in Grand Rapids, Michigan, by the brilliant Dr. Todd Robinson. And then from there, very eye-opening, both internally and externally, we started doing trainings. Again, that shared language. REAL is like Racial Equity Action Leadership with National Equity Project, foundations, and also the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. That's what the PISAB stands for. And really started digging deep on policy change. And we did a brand new strategic plan. We hadn't done one in decades. And then creating a structure to advance equity. Go to the next slide. And so with the strategic plan, and this is really our guiding document, I probably say strategic plan about, I don't know, 20 times a day. Like we really look at this document, and if I showed you a copy of mine, it's very weathered because it's well loved, right? I work on it all the time. And so we had this process to create it that we actually had people trained on equity, and they were part of every team as we create the different priority areas to make sure that equity wasn't a standalone, but more embedded throughout the entire plan and embedded throughout metrics. And metrics are important, which is why we eventually partnered with Scott as well. So we co-created, we did with the whole staff, 1,500 of us in town halls. We established equity as our value. We have an equity statement. It's really beautiful. I co-wrote it, so I'm a little biased towards it, but I think it's really strong. I'll share that with you. And our very first objective in the strategic plan was to embed equity into city operations. We must lead with equity. I always say it has to be in the DNA, right? You have to bake it in, you can't sprinkle it on top. And so that was really important for us. And then also putting metrics together, accountability and reporting, and then also using GARE's racial equity toolkit. We kind of modified that and we started assessing how equity was in the budget. So we went from not knowing to 1 year, we estimate about 14 million in this past year that we're currently in, about 25 million that could be directly aligned to equity. And that was really exciting. I also want to note this is a journey. We haven't arrived yet. And so, and I hope to continue to learn and grow and do better. Next slide. So what I'm going to share with you is some strategies that we have done that have been well loved and appreciated in community, and that we believe is making a difference as far as fostering welcoming and belonging for our residents. So the first one is a neighborhood match fund. So you may be familiar with these models from across the country. We have a smaller fund than the original one out west, but we do provide contracts. They're not grants, they're contracts, because we believe the residents are context experts and they're experts of their lived experience. What is an expert? You spend so many hours doing something, you're an expert. Well, they spend a lot of hours living in their neighborhoods, right? And so we need neighborhood experts. We give them up to $10,000. And it's really, and only Grand Rapids residents can apply. And this is about building really strong relationships in their communities, whether those communities are geographic communities or they're cultural communities. We find that that's really important. It helps to also reclaim the narrative of leadership. Have you been at an organization where you write grants and you're like, oh, look at all this, disparity, look at all these people suffering. And then those people, you look at the diversity of your own staff or your board and it doesn't reflect there, right? And so what that tells me, it's like you're using their oppression to get your dollars, but how are you actually hiring from community and investing in community, right? And that's really important. And I kind of take that from when I was in philanthropy. And so what this does, it says leadership talent lives here. There's brilliance in our neighborhood, right? Community is brilliant and resilient. And, they have the solutions that we seek. And so we invest here. And if someone said, oh, I don't know anyone. Well, I have a whole list of neighborhood residents that are just amazing. They also must advance social justice and inclusion. And we really focus on deliverables. So, I'm not getting receipts and all that. I'm like, you said you're going to do this. Did you do it? Great. Here's the contract, we're contracting. So I would like to shout out the photo, the Black Book Exchange Box was something that we seeded and now it has gotten national recognition and it's beautiful. The actual, it's like a little library, the structure was built in the local African-American community. The artwork, I wish I had a side view I could show you. It's beautiful artwork done by a local Black artist, and all the books are either by a Black author, or have a Black illustrator, or Black history. So very exciting. And then the local Black families actually host this box in their yard. And so it's just really just beautiful. It's just, I love donating and getting books in there. And then the other one behind it is a beautiful photo when we talk about belonging of, we had people come together, this is before COVID, come together, kind of do what Scott was talking about, like just really get to know each other and break bread. And we took photos. And then now their likeness is actually in this mural. And when I mentioned that, the grandma of the little girl, she's like, oh, my grandbaby, she has the 2 puffs, she's purple, right? I was like, oh, okay, so I go back and I look, and now every time I go past this mural, I'm looking for her grandbaby, and I hope you can see her there hugging the little blue girl. So this is just a few examples of just lifting up community brilliance and fostering belonging. Next slide. I could talk neighborhood match fun all day. I love it. This other project that our office does is the Grand Rapids Neighborhood Summit. So it's going on 7 years, which is really powerful. We did a lot of changes since the first year to really make it more accessible to residents. So we moved it from a Friday to a Saturday. We offered, childcare, which they have their own summit in and of themselves. They're there learning, right? All residents plan this with the city. We have interpreters. I think it's 75% of the presenters are actually residents, because again, talent lives here, and how do we lift up resident voice? And then most recently, this 1-day event, because of COVID, so this past year actually expanded to 5 days so we could spread out in bigger parks. But we added a summit marketplace where we had about 35 vendors of color set up to help support local businesses, but also diverse businesses. What I will say about this, we had usually in the past, when it was a 1-day event, we had about 500 folks. This past year, we had 2,000 over the course of 5 days. So it was really powerful. And the evaluations consistently over the last 5 years, I was like, I can't believe it. It's just the energy, the vibe of this place. I've never seen so much diversity in Grand Rapids all in one spot, and not just racial diversity, but age and genders and abilities. And so it's just really like this beautiful healing space. And what's really great is that everyone comes together. So whether all walks of life come together, they're eating together, they're learning together, they're having these impromptu conversations in the hallway. And it's really beautiful. And then we also capture resident voice, which you can see with the graphic notes around, we're doing some budgeting differently this year to have resident voice. So I will share a link in the chat around that. You can look that up as well. So the welcome plan, now we're starting to get, okay, so we did diversity inclusion, we got equity, we're changing structures. And now we're like, okay, how do we get to welcoming? And so with our partners with Welcoming America, Welcome Michigan, and also Gateways for Growth, which is a partnership of New American Economy and Welcome America, we got some technical funds to get this report, which was New Americans in Kent County, which is a county which we're in. New American is another way to say immigrant. It's a snapshot of the demographic and economic contributions of this country. And we had a lot of discussion, right? There's always these business cases, right? And for us, I was like, it didn't settle right with my spirit. So I had to speak on it. So if you know me, I'm going to speak on it. I always do. And so I was like, well, people's worth is more than what they can contribute to capitalism. And so we were very clear about that, right? And then also we wanted to also recognize, because often in oppressive systems, different communities are pitted against each other, right? And I wanted to be really clear that this wouldn't be used to pit against our longtime residents, particularly residents of color, right? That are also, can be struggling. And so this is that report. I'll share the link. And then from there, we built, okay, how do we make this welcoming? Like, what do we need to do? So we did thousands of surveys, dozens and dozens of focus groups with different immigrant communities to come up with recommendations. And so that will be in that plan. And then we have a welcome coordinator that kind of coordinates and makes sure that things are moving and celebrating wins. And also like, hey, we have a lot of folks, new residents arriving from Afghanistan, and we need to prepare. And then of course we celebrate Welcoming Week. Some other things real quick around belonging. We recently declared racism as a public health crisis, because it is, and we like to tell the truth. And I know it impacts my health, right? So So we leverage that, and hopefully others will leverage that to bring resources and attention to that and educate. We have the Neighborhood Leadership Academy, similar to what you were talking about, Scott, going beyond like, neighborhood watch where it's like, I see you versus like, or like, I'm watching you to like, I see you, hi, I see us, like how, welcome, that kind of thing. So in infusing equity into the neighborhood associations. We also restructured, we have a new office. So D&I was elevated to the Office of Equity and Engagement, and it was elevated in the organization. We have a new Office of Oversight and Public Accountability with the police and fire departments, which is, I kind of say like the equity office for the police department, but also just helping celebrate what's working and build what needs to be built, right? And then of course, performance management, what measures matters, right? And so we want to make sure we do that. We've deepened our relationship with NEP to do equity champions for mid-level staff to say, okay, you're passionate about this, you have some training, now how do we apply equity to policy? Equity analyst position. And then of course we started, this is new, we have a new employee resource group policy. We didn't have one before. And now we have 4, the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, Local Government Latino Network, PRISM GR for LGBTQI and allies, and then social justice for those that want to dive deeper in their journey. And then last but not least, really like I talked about with the budget, more intentionality to invest in equity. And then we're experimenting, piloting participatory budgeting right now, where the community will decide where $2 million will go. So the next slide. So this brings us to the Belonging Initiative. So this is Scott's work, but I'm going to talk about it from our perspective. And so we, in our strategic plan, we have a strategy that it says, assess residents' sense of belonging in the city. Like it's in our strategic plan before Scott even came to us. But fortunately, Scott did come to us a few months later with like this, with the Belonging Index. And so we wanted to partner to, again, like talent lives here, invest in Scott and invest in this survey, but the overall concept to explore it being a metric. And we've seen some, it's kind of like, sometimes people call it innovation, but sometimes it's just like old school wisdom that we used to do and getting back to it, right? Breaking bread. So here's a photo. This is not a city work, but this was Art Prize. It's a international art competition here in Grand Rapids. And they had a 300-foot long table and invited neighbors to have food together. And I just think it's really beautiful and captures the spirit of what we're trying to do. Next slide. So now I will hand it over to Scott to talk more about the survey aspect of the initiative versus the dinners. Yeah, and then we'll kind of
absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
No, thank you, Stacey. As you can see, it's exciting work. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background, like where did this all come from for me? I've been in, again, as I said, I founded an organization called Global Bridge Builders. We actually do global diversity, equity, inclusion consulting. We work in about 8 countries, and we do everything from supply chain to policies. It's very, very comprehensive, and we're all metric based. And so this really, I look at this as a continuation of the work I've been doing for 25 years. And so we worked with the Center for Social Research to make sure that our data had integrity and that it was something that truly organizations could adopt with some really good stats to back it up. And so what we work with Calvin University there. So what we'll first see here is that, again, in our very, very kind of the impetus of it, we had 261 responses completed between April 21 and August 6th. Of course, with COVID happening, we would have had, of course, without it, rather, we would have had many, many more respondents. But it was just good to kind of put some oil on the gears just to make sure that we are heading in the right direction. And so as you can see, this is actually dialed into by zip code. And to me, that's very important because when you think of how people move into communities, oftentimes, even the real estate folks, they'll show them an area, right? But if you don't really know much about the area, you can't about where to ask. They'll take you to this part. It's the north part. It's the south part. It's the east part. But when you really dial into zip codes, and that was the thing that I really wanted, because that was the work that we had not done in our community around belonging. And so I was really interested in creating primary research around zip codes, because you can move based upon a zip code, right? It's hard to move based upon an area in a particular town. So that was really important.
Can I add to that as well?
Yeah, please. Yeah, sure.
To the previous slide. Also, as we do survey work with the City of Grand Rapids, or as you do your work, we must disaggregate by race, ethnicity, gender identity, going beyond the binary. It's really important because everyone has a different lived experience, and often it is based on race, right? That's a whole nother webinar, but it's factual. And so part of our strategic plan too is that I think the second objective was disaggregate all data by race, ethnicity, gender identity, and then geography, because sometimes race data isn't available, but unfortunately in many cities across the country, folks are sometimes also still racially segregated, right? If we're being really real about it. And so we must do that. And so that, and then if you don't have enough respondents where you can do that, where you can disaggregate, then you're not done surveying, right? Like, in order to really honor and to have a sense of belonging in their shared story, you got to be able to disaggregate. So I just wanted to say, you're not done until you can disaggregate.
Yeah, it's true. And I think the point, and also an additional to kind of tag along with that, is the fact that it was interesting to find that a lot of organizations, because again, in our work in DE&I and our firm and our team, we find as we kind of do our initial discovery phase that organizations and even some industries, they don't actually desegregate based upon ethnicity. You can't dial it in that way. And so, of course, you can see we measure other things. But I will tell you that it's important to look at it through a lot of different dimensions and not just lump people all in one group. Because when you begin to kind of peel back the layers, you will see that people have very, very different realities. Some of the work I was doing when our firm first started was we were actually going to get more ethnic diversity in our downtown arenas and our performance spaces. And I remember speaking to a gentleman that was in, we got him to finally come to one of the focus groups. And he said to me, he says, you know what? I really appreciate the work that you're doing. He said, downtown for me, is he said, for some folks, it's only, where he lived, it was like 7 miles away. He said, for some folks, Prospect is 7 miles away. He said, for me, it might as well be 1,000. And what that spoke to was the fact that he did not feel like he belonged down there. So that was also a catalyst for the work that I'm doing with the belonging initiative as well, is to bring people down and let them know they also have ownership in the things that we do downtown. What you'll see here is just a net promoter score. And I want to show you this because you see all respondents, right? You see on the right side of the screen, the promoters. These are folks that are in, they are really selling, believe in, enjoying, and highly engaged in the city. Again, we could do this with companies and things like that, but right now we're talking about municipalities. But then we talk about the folks that are kind of on the fence. They could be convinced either way. And then you have people that are just, they're really kind of, I'm not liking this. I'm looking for another opportunity, looking for a way to kind of move forward. But now, and let's go further to Stacey's point. So let's look at this. So watch the screen. Now, notice over here, net promoter as it relates to the white members of our community, right? You see this, fewer detractors, right? But look at this in terms of they're selling West Michigan, they believe in it, their experience is something that they'd like to talk about. Now, next screen, people of color. Let's go back again. White over here. Look at how it indexes down based upon communities of color. And if you go to the left, you see there are folks of color, members of our community, they are not having a good experience. They're waiting for the next opportunities, what they're doing. And they could be convinced, some of them could be convinced either way, but again, look at just the drop from the white community members to the people of color. So just something to look at. We look at it in terms of feelings of belonging for all respondents, as you can see. And again, if you take the assessment online, you'll see we ask these same questions, but you are welcome, you belong, you fit in, you've got a seat at the table. One of the things, by the way, that's just incidentally, because we get smarter every single dinner we have, is that, so we have the dinners, they're about between 12 and 15 people, but one of the things that I identified and just began to do is we actually put an empty chair at the table every time, because that is symbolic of the voice. There is a voice that we're still missing. So there's this quest to always make sure, because the question is not who is at the table, the question is always who is not at the table. And so, but as you can see here, we ask these questions. Now, these are all respondents, once again, so watch the screen. You can see, right, this is very, very different in terms of how people feel a great deal of belonging, right? But now let's go to the next screen. It went from 35%, folks, to 18%. That's pretty big in terms of feeling welcoming and fitting in, and where their voice has power, and they're empowered to influence, right? And so these are things we want to pay attention to. And again, when I first began to go into to have the index developed, I really wanted to, it was about people getting connected in our community quickly. But what you'll find is that based upon who you are, that connection can happen. It may take a lot longer, or it may be a lot shorter. If you come in as a high level senior executive, a white senior executive, chances are you're going to find connection more quickly. I'm not saying that you feel like you belong, but you could even flip that over to a high level executive of color, which I'm very connected with and whatnot. And I see some of them leave. And so it's not even sometimes where you are in the organization, it's simply your experience and your ability to connect quickly. So here we go, another one, time and GR to belong. I will tell you that what we've learned, we have about 18 months to win the hearts of people to stay in our community. And we got to do it well. So we have to get connected like immediately and try to show people where they are. That's where the dinner all is part of it. And the index lets us know from a quantitative and kind of a framework standpoint, what other areas do we need to really focus on? But as you can see, belonging felt like they belonged right away, right? 30%, not bad, right? Less than 6 months. Some people said they still feel like they don't belong. And so that's where, again, just because a person has lived in a community for many, many years does not feel that they feel like they're connected. So that's where that's a bit. Oh, of course you can. Yeah, sure.
So for this one, I'm really passionate about, because I'm also one of the co-founders of the Latina Network of West Michigan. And 2 of the 4 founders really, because of this, is really why they wanted to do this. We started meeting in a cafe like every week and just having this time to connect. Again, breaking bread, old is new, right? And then we're like, how do we expand this? That was 7 years ago. Now we have like 600 members. And how we started it was really because they were lonely, y'all. Like, yeah. They're not from here. They came in. If you don't grow up here, sometimes it's hard to connect. And so that's really powerful. And I wanted to introduce this. So in your organization, how can you support these affinity groups? We have Black Women Connect GR. We have all these different affinity groups supporting your team, your staff to find those connections, because it could be like just the biggest relief exhale ever for people. And that's really important. And so please consider starting them or supporting them and supporting your team to truly participate, because that is retention.
You know, Stacey, to that point, last week I hosted the National Black MBA Association, and it's a professional organization with its headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, 41 chapters nationwide, and with 2 of our clients, Experience Grand Rapids, our Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Founders Brewing. We actually hosted the senior leadership there to West Michigan. And why? We had 45 people from 15 different organizations. And I will tell you what was really interesting about that is the fact that if for all the pipelines that we talk about that we'd like to have, we sometimes just kind of circle around the ditch, but we don't actually get ourselves out of it. And so that's where I said, you know what, let's do it. So I called my colleague who heads up the Experience Grand Rapids, our client folks at Founders, and said, hey, if you can fly them in, let's give them kind of the heads and beds, and we can give them food and beverage. Let's host people. And so we're actually going to be starting a chapter here. It takes time, but for me, I always come from the perspective of I want to build the city that I like to live in. And so I'm not a fringe person. I get in there, I do the work, and I work and collaborate with other folks that like doing the work. That's why this is so easy to do it with Stacey and Grand Rapids, because we're really on the same page. We may do it a little bit differently. Our concentric circle may be broad, but you got to get in there and start something. And so that's with her Latina Network, with MBAA. My wife actually was the co-inceptor of Jack and Jill of America, an African-American mom-led organization, the NIA Center of African-American Culture. So, we start things. And this is one of those other things that we believe it's important, but we'd like to share with other cities around the nation. So this is interesting, organization types and belonging. So how do you feel you've been treated by the following types of organizations in Grand Rapids, or, whatever, New Brunswick, whatever city you want to put in there. But your employer, workplace, right? Arts and organizations. What I wanted to do in this index is I wanted to get as broad of a circle and frame as possible, because people don't, when they come to a city, when they're recruited, if they have some healthy working habits, they don't sleep at their desk, right? They live in community. And so it's so important to understand that they might be the director of this, or they might be the new electrician over here, the new teacher, they might be the new CEO, but they live in community. So it's not enough to just have them go to their one company job in the morning. It's also important that as they go back and leave that door, they can go to a restaurant where they feel where they belong. They can go to an event and see themselves vicariously represented. All those things create a climate, and I always say climate determines what grows, right? We have to create the climate if we want to grow certain things. And so as you can see here, we really cover the gambit to just talk to kind of address those items as well. We even went into personality traits because that's important too. And I know that Stacey and I, we were kind of going back and forth because we thought that it's like some of the things that we would expect to see were some of the people that we would think that they would index higher. They didn't necessarily, right, index as high, but we did see, notice you see self-disciplined, dependable, open to new experiences, sympathetic and warm, reserved and quiet, right? And so it kind of indexes down, disorganized, careless, as they would self-identify. So critical and quarrelsome, those types of things. But again, we wanted to look at this in many, many different ways. And as more communities come online, this index will get smarter and smarter and smarter. And the goal is actually, of course, we want to host the first conference in Grand Rapids, but the goal is to get many, many organizations and cities across the nation to do this, have a belonging conference around this data, and then share best practices. Again, my firm, Global Bridge Builders, we're very much around process integration, process engineering, and metrics. And so that's where we are looking for data to support processes and systems in terms of how to create belonging. So that's something else to think about. And that's the last slide. Yeah.
Yeah, I just like to add, and so in the beginning, before we went into slides, we talked about it's really important that you segregate by race and ethnicity, and then we did group people of color all together. And the reason why, I just wanted to reiterate that because I want you to know we said what we meant and we meant what we said. It's just the slide COVID, right? People got screen fatigue. I mean, I didn't wear glasses before COVID. Now I do, right? Digitally engaged fatigue. But now that we're kind of coming out, at least somewhat on the other end, we just didn't have the numbers. But what's really exciting about what we just shared, talking with the Center for Social Research, the evaluation partner on this, was that this is a really solid proof of concept, right? Both the dinner, which they called the secret sauce, and the surveys is something that you can do maybe every few years to kind of do that. And so, I would say like the infrastructure is there, like the survey, and then the reporting. And so what Scott showed you was just a few of the slides because of time, but there's other ways to look at the data as well. So if you're like, I also want to say that as a city, because some of the numbers were low, but we still wanted to give you an idea of what you might see if you were to do this in your city. So proof of concept that we'll explore again. Thank you.
All right. I'll stop sharing the screen there. Any questions? And maybe Rebecca, you want to kind of facilitate that? We're here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott and Stacey. A lot of great information to chew on. And we did have a couple of questions come in through the chat, and encourage everyone to put any remaining questions in the chat. We'll get to those. And then you can also, if you'd rather unmute yourself, just use the raise hand feature on Zoom down here, and you can ask your question live. So the first question we had was sort of COVID related in regards to the neighborhood summit and how you were able to manage to continue to have that, or if you did have that, and how basically belonging in general has been affected by the need to isolate over the last 18 months or so.
Absolutely. So the first part was summit. It used to be a one-day event. So we took the core elements, opening ceremony. We did a very big presentation with the local Native community, drum presentation. And then we had 3 different workshops. And then we had a kind of like a closing plenary raffle, and we highlight folks. And then at the end, you know how you would do like VIP parties for like the sponsors? I was like, everybody's VIP. So then we switched it up and we said we did a community celebration. So we used to do that one day. We literally took those components and spread it out over 5 days. And instead of indoors, we did it outdoors. We did masks were required. Of course, we had hand sanitizer anywhere you turned, that sort of thing. But the main thing was that we were outdoors. We were allowed to socially distance in these really large green spaces, which then in itself also foster wellness, right? Green space. So that was how we did it. We worked with risk management. We worked with our emergency manager. We went through like protocols, contact tracing. Fortunately, because of all the precautions we put in place, it was really safe for everyone. And there was no, you know, how do you say, super spreader or anything like that. So that's how we did it for Summit. The second piece around belonging, you know, we had a choice to cancel Summit. There's a lot of things that were canceled, but we said, you know what? Our 2 values that lead Summit that the community literally voted on was resident voice, racial equity. And a part of that is that we need to connect, right? And I mean, every molecule of my body hungered for a hug, you know, during this night. And so we're like, well, we can't do that. We can bring people together to have conversations again. And it's needed. So we could have said no, but we said, nope, we're going to make it happen. And we're going to put in a lot more work to make it happen for 5 days. But that was because of that, we had to have it. And we brought it to neighborhoods. So instead of everyone coming to one spot, every day it was in a different neighborhood so people could walk there and be more accessible and feel safer. I would say also we had mental health clinicians of color, which Neighborhood Match Fund actually helped fund this group of mental health clinicians of color in Grand Rapids and help them get their website and stuff together. And we promoted mental health throughout the year in communities of color, which sometimes can be viewed as like, just, you know, like you're not supposed to do that, but really like, yeah, you are. So we really promoted mental health. And then they were there doing art therapy with kids and with adults and talking about mental health as well. So that was a big component of Summit as well, because we knew that, you know, we were suffering. We're people too, right? Like we were suffering with that and we know our community was too. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And we do have quite a few questions here. So I'll just keep those rolling until we run out of time. So the first one came in earlier in the webinar, and the question was about how does the work of global bridge builders sort of complement a city's GARE work? Scott, I think that one a little bit more geared towards you.
Yeah, so I founded the firm in 2006, and we worked actually with a lot of municipalities. In fact, one of our biggest clients that we've been working with is City of Dallas, Texas, and 15,000 employees there. And we did this, and we actually have a process, a very structured process through which we move in 5 phases with organizations. And so it is certainly connected. Our focus is really not just race and ethnicity, but it's actually we drive innovation through diversity. So our focus is heterogeneity. And if you think about that, because we work around the world, you know, if we're in Singapore doing work as South African, or if we're in India, or if we're in, you know, Germany or Brazil, which we work in all those places, you know, who can be around the table is a little bit different from place to place. And so our drive has always been innovation. And so that has been really, really helpful for us. And so when you have organizations like GARE that Stacey mentioned, we're very complementary. Our focus is really assessment and implementation and audit. So we literally, what I do, I say we tie the cable to the floor in really mobilizing workforces to do work around our we have a process, and we have an actual proprietary tool called the Inclusion Systems Assessment, which is the only DE&I tool of its kind that's connected to the Baldrige National Quality Award.
Thank you. All right, the next one is in regards to the survey as well. And the question is it possible to do the survey at the neighborhood level versus the city level? Would the process be the same?
Yeah, it really is. And really, if you look at it, kind of how GR did it and how Stacey's work and her team really drive this, it's by zip code. So, I mean, now, and we actually wanted to go even further, but we couldn't because of COVID. We were looking at actually hiring people within the community to go and knock on doors and do for the folks that may not have even been online. Well, how do you address that? Well, you know what? You get funding to go get a team, and you hit it with a survey army, and you go across the city, particularly in those pockets where they may may not, the likelihood of them being online might be questionable. And so you can drill down as far as you want. We had to get to the zip code level, which I think is really, really good, because that's where, to me, that's new data. We oftentimes don't have it dialed there, but we're not even stopping there. When we can get out there more and more, we're actually going to be getting survey teams to go from door to door to even get household, and we will actually want to get it to the block, Rebecca. That's how deep we want to go.
Great. And then we had a question in regards to if you have any data about income level and how that relates to belonging, or if that criteria was important to you.
It was important, but I want to have Stacey respond to that too, because zip code kind of, you can also kind of, you look at some things from zip code and say, here's kind of a disposable income in this area. But Stacey, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's always this balance of, can we infer something from another question? So the survey,
right?
Because when someone's like, oh, let's take 10 minutes and you're like 20 minutes in, you're like, okay, well, you just broke my trust. Like I really only had 10 minutes. So we were really trying to balance that. Unfortunately, zip code, but also census tract level, we have a lot of data on income. So we could always overlay with some of that data. But to answer your question, yes, the answer is yes. Because wealth and health is connected, right? Income provides opportunities to do different things, to get into some of these ERGs and affinity groups where others don't. So I would say the answer is yes. What the survey, I believe, Scott, no, this is on your department, can be adapted if you wanted to add a certain question or take out a certain question, as long as the core is similar, so you can compare year to year. But absolutely.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right, Stacey.
All right, and another one I have here is what your thoughts are on breaking people of color into more categories. So the follow-up question was, recently immigrated Blacks may feel different than Blacks who have been in the US for a while. Is there any taking that into consideration?
There is. I mean, the people that are supporting the index are much more data savvy than me. I just kind of lead it and kind of structure it. But then that's where you do it one way online. There's kind of the quantitative part. The qualitative part is in dinners where you have the conversation and you have different people around the table that do represent different groups. And so you can actually do it on the survey, right? You could, as you begin to kind of go further down into that. And of course, there are opportunities to weight certain things based upon a citizen's longevity in the community. But I also think that's where the other side, the dinner part, is really good too, because you can actually hear people's stories about. I mean, my first dinner was a shocker for me because I had a friend of mine who had been in West Michigan for 23 years. In fact, she was my professor in grad school. Then she moved to another part of town, and she says, Scott, I've been living here for 23 years, and I just got an invite as a newcomer to a community, to a block party. Now she moved to another part of the city, not Grand Rapids, East Grand Rapids they call it, and she got this new invite. And I said, wow, that's really interesting, Tiff. So, again, that's where you do the dialing, the kind of the digging in, and you can dig as far as you want to find what you need. Great.
And then I'm not sure you covered this question in the presentation, but is there a way to break it down based on age or generation?
Yeah, because actually, if I would say everybody to take the survey, right? It's right on belonginginitiative.us. You see it in English or Spanish, and you'll see that right in there, we have a demographics page, and then it brings you further into the other parts of how you feel. As Stacey said, there are a lot of slides we couldn't show you. I mean, a lot of slides. And so the demographics part of that begins to talk about generation and those types of things.
Great. And I think this will be the last question we're able to get to, but the question is, has the index been used in other communities? If so, were the results similar, and are there plans to expand its use?
Yeah, actually, as it said at the very beginning, it's a national index, but we started out, as Stacey said, we want to beta test it in our community to work out the bugs, and it's getting strong. So when people would like to have this done in their area, they can certainly contact us, contact me. You can do Scott, S-K-O-T, at globalbridgebuilders.com. And, we can walk you through that. And for the folks that are really into the research side of it, we can connect you, just as Stacey works with the Center for Social Research, connect you with that team. And but yeah, the goal is actually to scale it nationally so that communities can share best practices with each other. Because if we can actually add more belonging communities, we win as a nation. So and the people win as well.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. There's some really good conversation going on in the chat that I'm going to try to capture for everyone, but we are running towards the end of our time. So I just want to give a special shout out to both Scott and Stacey. Thank you for your work on this. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon to share your expertise and your experience. To everyone else, thank you for being with us. We have these webinars monthly, usually towards the end of the month, so be on the lookout for that. As I mentioned, the recording and slides and some of the additional resources that we talked about during the course of the webinar will be included in a follow-up email that you'll get either later this afternoon or early tomorrow. So be on the lookout to that. If you have any questions that you want to follow up with, just respond to my email and we'll make sure that we get those addressed. And with that, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon. Thank you all.